Alaska Baker hunted women like animals. The Robert Hansen story. Part 1. Imagine living in a place where endless forests stretch beyond the horizon, where mountains rise from the wilderness, and where thousands of square miles remain untouched by civilization. A place so vast that if someone disappeared, they might never be found. For most people, Alaska is a land of breathtaking beauty. For Robert Hansen, it became the perfect hunting ground. For over a decade, women vanished from the streets of Anchorage. Some were runaways, some were dancers, some were sex workers trying to survive another night. Many people assumed they had simply left town, but they hadn't. Predator was stalking them. Predator who didn't just kill. He hunted. He treated human beings like wild animals. And for years, nobody knew he existed. This is the true story of Robert Hansen, one of America's most terrifying serial killers. A man who abducted women, flew them deep into the Alaskan wilderness, released them into the forest, and then tracked them down with a rifle. Before investigators uncovered the truth, at least 17 women would lose their lives. To understand how such a monster could exist, we have to begin long before the murders. Robert Christian Hansen was born on February 15, 1939, in Esterville, Iowa. At first glance, his childhood appeared relatively ordinary. His parents were Danish immigrants who operated a bakery. The family worked hard, and young Robert spent much of his childhood helping in the business. But behind the scenes, Hansen struggled socially. He was painfully shy. Many people who knew him later described him as awkward and withdrawn. School was particularly difficult. He suffered from severe acne, which left scars across his face. Teenagers can be cruel, and Hansen became a frequent target of bullying. Classmates mocked his appearance. Girls showed little interest in him. The rejection left deep emotional wounds. Over time, Hansen developed intense resentment toward people who humiliated him, particularly women. While many people experience bullying and move on with their lives, investigators later believed these early experiences played an important role in shaping Hansen's future. As he grew older, he became increasingly isolated. However, he discovered one activity that made him feel powerful: hunting. In rural Iowa, hunting was common. For Hansen, it became more than a hobby. It became an obsession. Unlike social situations, hunting gave him control. Animals couldn't reject him. They couldn't mock him. In the wilderness, he felt confident and capable. He became exceptionally skilled with firearms and tracking. Years later, those same skills would be used for something far more sinister. By his early 20s, Hansen seemed to be building a normal life. He married young. The marriage failed. He later remarried and started a family. To neighbors, he appeared hardworking and responsible. Yet warning signs had already begun to emerge. In 1960, Hansen was arrested for burning down a school bus garage. Not long afterward, he was also accused of theft. The incidents suggested a darker side hiding beneath his quiet exterior. Still, nobody could have predicted what was coming. In the late 1960s, Hansen moved to Alaska. For many people, Alaska represented opportunity. For Hansen, it represented freedom. The state offered something few places could: isolation. Huge stretches of wilderness covered much of the landscape. Entire areas were accessible only by small aircraft. Dense forests, mountains, rivers, and remote valleys made search efforts incredibly difficult. If someone disappeared in Alaska, finding them could be nearly impossible. Hansen settled in Anchorage. Eventually, he opened a bakery and became a respected member of the community. To outsiders, he appeared to be a model citizen. He owned a business. He had a wife. He raised children. He attended community events. Neighbors described him as quiet but pleasant. Few people suspected that he was living a double life. During the 1970s, women began disappearing from Anchorage. Many belonged to vulnerable populations. Some worked as dancers. Others were involved in sex work. Many struggled financially. Because of their circumstances, disappearances often received less attention than they deserved. At first, nobody connected the cases. The victims came from different backgrounds. The disappearances occurred over long periods of time. There were few obvious links, but a pattern was forming. What investigators didn't know was that Hansen had developed a horrifying method. He would search for vulnerable women around Anchorage. Many were approached near bars, clubs, or areas known for prostitution. At first, he appeared harmless. Short, soft-spoken, middle-aged, not the kind of man most people imagined when they thought of a dangerous predator. That appearance worked to his advantage. After gaining a victim's trust or forcing her into his vehicle, Hansen would transport her to a secluded location. There, the nightmare truly began. Some victims were assaulted and murdered quickly. Others experienced something even worse. According to investigators, Hansen became fascinated by the idea of hunting human beings. He owned a small aircraft and frequently flew into remote wilderness areas. Authorities later discovered evidence suggesting that he transported victims into isolated regions accessible only by plane. Once there, he would release them. Sometimes he reportedly gave them a head start. Then he armed himself with a rifle and began tracking them through the wilderness. The details remain among the most disturbing in American criminal history. Victims found themselves alone in forests stretching for miles. No roads, no telephones, no nearby towns, no realistic chance of rescue. Even if they escaped Hansen temporarily, the wilderness itself could be deadly. Freezing temperatures, wild animals, rugged terrain. Every direction led deeper into isolation. Then the hunt would begin. Years later, investigators would discover shallow graves scattered throughout remote areas. Many victims had never been reported missing. Others had been forgotten by a system that often overlooked vulnerable women. For Hansen, the wilderness became both a playground and a hiding place. And for years, he got away with it. One reason was his ability to blend into society. Unlike many serial killers who attract attention through erratic behavior, Hansen appeared remarkably ordinary. He paid taxes, ran a business, raised a family. When police encountered him, he didn't fit their image of a murderer. This phenomenon has appeared repeatedly throughout criminal history. Some of the most dangerous killers hide behind normal lives. The contrast makes them difficult to detect. While Hansen's crimes continued, investigators struggled to connect scattered pieces of evidence. Bodies occasionally surfaced in remote areas. Disappearances continued. Rumors circulated. But nobody had enough information to expose the killer. That changed in 1983. The turning point came because one woman survived. Her name was Cindy Paulson. On June 13, 1983, Hansen encountered Paulson in Anchorage. Like many of his previous targets, she was vulnerable. At some point, Hansen forced her into his vehicle. He drove her away and eventually took her to his home. What happened next would ultimately lead to his downfall. According to Paulson, Hansen assaulted her and restrained her. But unlike many previous victims, she found an opportunity to escape. Terrified and desperate, she ran. She wasn't wearing shoes. She had little clothing. Yet she kept running. Somehow she reached a road. A passing truck driver spotted the frightened young woman and stopped. Paulson told him she had been kidnapped. Police were contacted. For the first time, investigators had something they had lacked for years. A living witness. Paulson described her attacker. She described his vehicle. Most importantly, she identified Robert Hansen. Initially, however, investigators were skeptical. Hansen appeared respectable. Paulson, on the other hand, came from a vulnerable background. Unfortunately, many authorities at the time were too quick to dismiss victims they considered unreliable. As a result, Hansen was not immediately arrested. But some detectives continued investigating. And as they dug deeper, disturbing connections began to emerge. The pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to fit together. The respected baker from Anchorage was about to become the focus of one of the largest serial murder investigations in Alaskan history. And what investigators would uncover next would reveal a level of brutality almost beyond belief.